Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Terry, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that people do terrible things without a second thought. They lie, cheat, and hurt the ones who trust them the most, and they do it without an ounce of regret, until they realize they've run out of options. That's when the excuses start, when the tears come, when they suddenly find it in their hearts to beg for forgiveness. But by then, it's not about regret. It's about desperation. For a long time, I believed my wife was a good person. I thought we had something real built on trust and love. Looking back now, I realize that betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It builds up in the small moments. I want you to really understand where I'm coming from, because this isn't just about my wife cheating. It's about what I lost. This story begins here, back when I still believed in us. I met Madison at work. At the time, I was simply trying to climb the corporate ladder. She, on the other hand, was ambitious, putting in long hours and doing everything she could to stand out. She wasn't the kind of woman you could easily ignore. Our company had a strict no-dating policy, but that didn't stop us from noticing each other. It started with casual conversations and little moments in between meetings. I didn't think much of it at first, but over time, something changed. We started staying back after work just to talk and enjoy each other's company. But as the months passed, those conversations turned into late-night texts, the kind that made you smile at your phone like an idiot. And before I knew it, we were sneaking off to have lunch together, making excuses to bump into each other in the break room, acting like teenagers with a crush. We knew the risks. If anyone found out, it could mean the end of our jobs. But at the time, it felt exciting. Like we had our own little secret world. Things got serious faster than either of us expected. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to pretend we were just coworkers. We had to be careful. But the more we hid it, the more obvious it became to us. This wasn't just a fling. We wanted something real. And if we were going to be together without constantly looking over our shoulders, something had to change. That's when I made the decision. I had always wanted to start my own business, but I kept putting it off because of the stability my job provided. Now, I had a reason to take the leap. I wasn't reckless about it. I spent time planning, making sure I had enough savings to sustain me while I got things off the ground. When I was ready, I walked into my boss's office and handed in my resignation. It wasn't easy giving up a steady paycheck, but in my mind it was worth it. I could finally build something for myself, and more importantly, I could be with Madison without restrictions. A few months after I left the company, we got married. It was the kind of wedding people call intimate, when they really mean we couldn't afford anything extravagant. But that didn't matter. At the time, it felt perfect. Madison still had her job, and I was knee-deep in starting my business. The first year was good. She was supportive of my dreams, and I was proud of her career. I spent long hours trying to get my company off the ground, and she worked late at the office, climbing the corporate ladder. We were both busy, but we made time for each other. At night, we'd talk about anything and everything. For many more years, everything seemed like it was falling into place. I believed I had made the right choice, that we were building something together. But I don't think anyone wakes up one day and breaks up their marriage. After 5 years, my marriage wasn't the same. The passion was gone. The connection was strained. And the intimacy? Well, let's just say I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own home. Madison and I had always been busy people, but we used to make time for each other. But then things shifted. It started with little excuses like she was tired, she had a long day, she needed to catch up on work. At first, I understood. I mean, who doesn't have rough days at work? But those rough days became constant. She started coming home later and later, always with a reason. Meetings ran over. A client dinner took longer than expected. Traffic was bad. Every night, I suggest we do something together, and she'd say, "Not tonight, Terry. I'm exhausted." I assumed it was just the natural rhythm of marriage. People always say the honeymoon phase fades, right? This is probably what happens when two people get caught up in their careers. So, I stopped pushing. I stopped asking. I assumed that if I gave her space, things would balance out again. But here's the thing about marriage. When one person pulls away and the other stops trying, the gap between them only grows wider. And that's exactly what happened. We stopped talking like we used to, and our conversations became robotic, just basic updates about work, bills, and schedules. The house felt different, like we were two roommates politely existing in the same space. And for a while, I let myself believe that was okay. But deep down, something didn't feel right. One evening, I was at my desk, going over some notes for my business, when my pen ran out of ink. No big deal, I just needed to grab another one. Madison always kept a bunch of random things in her purse, so I figured I'd find one there. I walked over to where she had left her bag in the bedroom and unzipped the side pocket, expecting to grab a pen and get back to work. But that's not what happened. The first thing I saw wasn't a pen, but a small bottle of pills. Madison wasn't on any medication that I knew of. I picked it up, turned it around in my hand, and read the prescription label more carefully. The name of the drug didn't ring a bell, so I pulled out my phone and typed it into Google. The first search result stopped me cold. It was for treating sexually transmitted diseases. For a second, my brain refused to process it. She hadn't let me touch her in months. She always came home claiming to be too tired for intimacy. Why is she taking medication for an STD? That could only mean one thing. But I wasn't done yet. Something told me to keep looking. I pushed past my shaking fingers and reached further into the bag. That's when I found the second thing, the hotel receipts. Multiple receipts. Different dates. Different amounts. All from a hotel I'd never stepped foot in. The earliest one dated back months. I just stood there, staring at them. My wife was going out of her way to be with someone else. And not just once. This had been happening for a long time, right under my nose. And the worst part? She was doing it unprotected. She had been lying to my face, avoiding intimacy with me. My first instinct was to storm into the living room and demand answers. But then, something in me snapped back to reality. I forced myself to breathe, to think. If I confronted her now, she'd lie. She'd deny everything, make excuses, maybe even destroy the evidence right in front of me. I couldn't let that happen. Instead, I took my phone out and snapped clear pictures of the pill bottle, the receipts, every detail. When I was done, I carefully put everything back exactly how I found it, showing no signs that I knew anything. Then, I walked back to my home office, sitting down to think about my life. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office. This wasn't just about catching Madison in the act, it was about what happened next. My lawyer asked, if you confront her, what do you want to happen next? That question caught me off guard. Up until that moment, all I had focused on was the betrayal, the anger, and the urge to make her face the truth. But I hadn't thought about the aftermath. If I confronted her, what would change? My lawyer didn't sugarcoat things. He told me straight. I needed to think beyond the confrontation. If I wanted to walk away from this marriage without getting destroyed in the process, I had to move carefully. Divorce wasn't just about emotions, it was about leverage. And right now, Madison had the upper hand. Without solid proof, she could deny everything, twist the story, and even make herself the victim. That's when my lawyer laid out the next step. You need undeniable evidence, he said. Something so clear that she can't wiggle out of it. That meant bringing in a professional. Someone who could gather concrete proof that would hold up legally. A private investigator. I agreed without hesitation. My lawyer had a contact. Within hours, the PI had all the details he needed. Madison's schedule, the receipts I found, even the name of the medication. From there, all I could do was wait. The investigation took more than a month, and during that time, I had to pretend like everything was normal. But every day that passed brought me closer to the truth. When the PI finally called, I wasn't sure I was ready. But once I saw the evidence, I realized there was no going back from this. Madison's affair wasn't just some one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. It had been going on for a long time, and worse. Her lover was someone I knew, a high-ranking executive from her workplace. The man was well-respected, someone I had even shaken hands with at company events. Seeing the photos and videos made my stomach turn. Things had been happening under my nose the entire time. At that moment, I knew our marriage wasn't salvageable. There was no fixing this. But if Madison thought I was going to walk away quietly, she had another thing coming. Now, it wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about making sure I didn't get blindsided in the process. If she wanted to play dirty, she was about to find out that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. Even with all this evidence, I knew that confronting Madison without a solid plan would be a mistake. A mistake that could cost me everything. The legal system has a way of turning even the most justified men into villains, especially in divorce cases. I wasn't about to walk into that trap. I needed to be smart. So, before I even thought about sitting her down and showing my hand, I made sure my financial foundation was untouchable. The first step was to protect my assets. I had worked too hard to build my business from the ground up, and I wasn't about to let Madison walk away with half of everything I owned just because she got caught. I transferred some of my most valuable assets, real estate, investments, and savings, to my parents. On paper, it looked like I didn't own them anymore. But in reality, they were still mine, just kept far out of her reach. I also set up a trust in another country that will legally own other things I have. It took a lot of research and careful planning, but I made sure that by the time the dust settled, I would still be standing. Next, I needed to make sure that if this did go to court, she wouldn't have any leverage over me. So, I started crafting a paper trail that made it look like my business was struggling. Not bankrupt, not suspiciously failing, just barely staying afloat. I funneled money through different accounts, made sure my financial records painted the picture of a company in a rough patch, and strategically timed expenses to make it seem like I wasn't making much profit. This way, if Madison tried to claim a share of my success, there wouldn't be much to take. In the eyes of the court, she would be the financially stable one, and I would be the one in need of support. This process wasn't quick. It took weeks to get everything in order. Once I was sure my financial security was airtight, it was time to confront her. One evening, Madison came home from work, just like any other day. She kicked off her heels, dropped her bag on the counter, and let out an exhausted sigh. She had no idea that her world was about to change. I was sitting at the dining table, a glass of wine in front of me, calm, composed. When she walked past me, I simply called her back and said, "Sit down." She looked at me for a moment, confused, but she did as I asked. I pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table toward her. She picked it up and opened it, and the moment her eyes landed on the contents, I saw her mood change. Inside were photographs of her and her lover, the executive she thought she was so careful with. Alongside the photos was a flash drive. She didn't need to ask what was on it. She knew. For a moment, she said nothing. She didn't deny it, didn't make excuses, didn't even try to act like she was sorry. Instead, she slowly placed the envelope back on the table, met my gaze, and said, "I don't regret a thing." She told me that if I filed for divorce with these as evidence, she would walk away with half of everything, maybe more, after telling the court I am worse than the devil. This confirmed everything I already knew about the kind of person she had become. But I didn't react to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I simply picked up my wine, took a slow sip, and leaned back in my chair. She might not regret what she did, but she had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, when the knock on the door came, I didn't move. I wanted her to answer it. Madison shuffled over and opened the door. A courier handed her a box, and she brought it inside, placing it on the kitchen counter. She opened it, and inside the box were our divorce papers, already signed by me. She stared at them, flipping through the pages, her face twisting with confusion. This wasn't how she thought things would go. But now, as she read through those papers, she realized she had miscalculated, and I was willing to divorce her, citing infidelity. Madison thought she was the one in control. She had no idea that she was already losing. Madison took me to court, believing she'd win big. I sat in that courtroom, watching Madison pretend to be the victim. She walked in with that smug confidence, thinking she had me cornered. She must have imagined herself walking out of there with everything, but what she didn't know was that I had spent months making sure I was legally untouchable. On paper, I was a broke man struggling to keep my failing business afloat. Every asset that had my name on it before? Gone. Legally transferred. It was like I didn't own a single thing. She, on the other hand, had been living the high life with her executive lover. Expensive dinners, hotel stays, shopping sprees, all on her credit cards. On paper, she looked like the financially stable one in our marriage, which meant one thing. She wasn't about to take anything from me. Instead, she was about to owe me. That reality hit her like a brick when the financial records were laid out in front of the court. She expected to walk away with half of everything I owned. Instead, the law saw her as the one who had to pay up. The moment she realized she had fallen into a trap, the panic set in. At first, she tried to fight it, claiming the records were misleading. Then, when that didn't work, she switched tactics, tears, emotional outbursts, accusations. She stood there, in front of the judge, claiming I was emotionally abusive, that I had manipulated her, that I had cheated on her first. She tried everything to paint me as the villain, hoping to claw her way out of the situation. But there was a problem. She had no proof. No evidence. Nothing but a desperate story. Every move she made in that courtroom only dug her deeper into the hole she had created for herself. The trial stretched on for months. Every hearing, every legal meeting, she looked more and more exhausted. And then, finally, when she saw that there was no way out, she did what people like her always do. She tried to negotiate. She reached out, asking if we could settle this privately. She wanted to avoid the final blow, the one she could feel coming. When she finally sat across from me, away from the lawyers and judges, she was no longer the arrogant woman who had told me she had no regrets. She was desperate now, looking for any way to soften the damage. That's when I reminded her of something she had probably forgotten in all her scheming. The file. The one filled with photos, texts, videos. The one that proved she had been sleeping with her high-ranking executive boss. The one that, if it landed in the hands of her company's management, would end her career in an instant. You see, Madison, I wonder how your company would react if they saw what I have on you. Workplace affairs don't look good in their world, do they? That's when she broke. She flat out begged me not to release it. The woman who had walked into court expecting to take everything from me was now at my mercy. And I let her stay there for a moment, just to let it sink in. Then, I told her exactly what needed to happen. She was going to agree to my terms. She was going to take whatever settlement I asked for. And she was going to walk away quietly, without a fight. She nodded through her tears because, at that point, she knew she had lost. Looking back, this entire experience taught me lessons I'll never forget. First, always protect yourself legally and financially. Love can make you blind, but paperwork sees everything. If I had walked into that courtroom unprepared, she would have drained me dry and left me with nothing. Instead, I made sure that by the time we stepped in front of a judge, my assets were secured, and I had a plan for every move she tried to make. If there's one thing I learned, it's that emotions don't win battles. Strategy does. That brings me to my second lesson. Never let emotions drive your decisions. When I first discovered her affair, my anger told me to confront her on the spot, to throw everything in her face and demand answers. But if I had done that, I would have given her time to twist the story, destroy evidence, and make herself look like the victim. Instead, I played it smart. I moved in silence, gathered what I needed, and waited until she had no way out. In the end, that's what saved me. And finally, the biggest lesson of all, cheaters never have regrets until they lose everything. When I first showed Madison the evidence, she sat there, looked me in the eye, and told me she had no regrets. She thought she was untouchable. But the moment she realized she was the one losing money, losing the house, losing the life she thought she could build off my back, that's when the begging started. Suddenly, she wanted to talk. Suddenly, she wanted to negotiate. But by then it was too late. I still wonder sometimes, what was she thinking when she took me to court, fully believing she could win? Did she ever imagine that the roles would reverse? That she would be the one begging for mercy? I guess I'll never know. But one thing's for sure, I made it out without losing a thing. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a single move. Let me know, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Thanks for watching.